It started on a Tuesday, the kind nobody remembers, until it's the one they can't forget. I was 61 years old, 3 months retired from 38 years on the floor at a machine shop, and I was sitting in my Camry outside a coffee shop waiting for my next fare to load into the app. My name is Walter. My wife, Carol, still worked 2 days a week at the elementary school library, and between her part-time paycheck and my pension, we were fine. Comfortable, even, but comfortable doesn't fill a man's mornings when he's used to clocking in before sunrise for 4 decades. So I drove. Not because we needed the money desperately, but because sitting in the house all day made me feel like a tool nobody was using anymore, and driving people around gave me somewhere to put my hands and my attention. That particular Tuesday, the app pinged with a pickup 3 blocks from a downtown high-rise, a name I didn't recognize, Preston, heading to an address I did recognize, because it was my daughter Emma's apartment building. I didn't think much of it. Plenty of people lived in that building. I pulled up. A young man in a slim gray suit slid into the back seat without so much as a glance my direction, already talking into his phone, and I drove him 11 minutes across town while he never once looked up. When we arrived, he said, "Yeah, thanks to the air somewhere near my headrest," tapped a 5-star rating without reading it, and left no tip. I didn't know yet that Preston was the man my daughter had been dating for 8 months. I didn't know he was about to become the center of everything. I found out 3 weeks later, at Sunday dinner, when Emma set her fork down and told Carol and me, eyes shining, that Preston had proposed. She showed us the ring. She told us his name, Preston Callahan, 31, a marketing director at a firm downtown. And something in my chest went cold and quiet, the way it does when a machine makes a sound that isn't quite right but hasn't broken yet. I didn't say anything about the ride. I told myself it was a coincidence, that plenty of Prestons existed in this city, that I was imagining a resemblance because the timing rattled me. I smiled at my daughter and told her I was happy for her, and mostly, underneath the unease, I was. It was 2 weeks after that when the app put him in my back seat again, and this time there was no mistaking it. He was on a video call, propped against the window, and I saw Emma's face on his screen for half a second before he angled it away. He still didn't look at me. Not once. Not when I asked if he wanted the AC lower. Not when I merged carefully around a stalled truck. Not when I dropped him at the exact building where, for days later, I'd be sitting across a dinner table from him as his future father-in-law. He shook my hand that Thursday night with a grip that didn't linger and a smile that didn't reach past his teeth, and he said, "Nice to finally meet you, Mr. Voss." Finally meet me. I'd driven him 11 miles across town twice already. He had no idea. And something in me, some old, tired, practical part of myself, decided, quietly, not to tell him. I want to be honest about why. Part of it was curiosity, plain and simple. A man shows you who he really is when he thinks no one important is watching, and I had, by accident, become no one important. But another part of it, the bigger part, if I'm honest, was that something about him unsettled me in a way I couldn't yet name, and I wanted to understand it before I said a word to Emma that might sound like jealousy or overprotectiveness, or an old man who couldn't let his little girl go. So I kept driving, and I kept my mouth shut, and I started, without quite admitting it to myself, keeping score. The first real mark went down on a rainy Wednesday morning about a month later. He got an already annoyed about something, phone pressed to his ear, and spent the whole ride complaining to whoever was on the line about the guy dragging his feet on the vendor contract. Except halfway through he switched topics without missing a beat and started talking about Emma. She wants the venue with the fountain. It's like $8,000 more than the other one. I don't know. I might just tell her we're doing the cheaper place and let her think it was a budget thing on both our parts. He laughed. Whoever was on the other end laughed too. I kept my eyes on the road and my hands steady on the wheel, and somewhere behind my ribs I filed it away. Not a crime. Not even really a lie. Just a small, careless cruelty toward a woman who trusted him. Delivered in a stranger's car by a man who had no idea the stranger driving him was her father. One mark. Small. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself everyone complains about wedding costs. The second mark came 6 weeks later, and it wasn't small. It was a Friday evening pickup from his office, and he was frustrated about something at work, venting to a friend named Derek. I only knew the name because he said it 11 times in 20 minutes. About how tight things were right now and how he'd had to borrow against some stuff to cover a shortfall nobody at the office could know about. Then, almost as an aside, almost proud of himself. Emma doesn't even know I moved money out of the joint savings account we started for the house. I'll put it back before she checks. She never checks anyway. I gripped the wheel a little tighter. I thought about Emma, 28 years old, a labor and delivery nurse who worked 12-hour shifts on her feet, saving every spare dollar toward a down payment, trusting a man who was quietly draining an account with her name on it to cover debts she didn't know existed. That wasn't a careless comment about a venue anymore. That was theft with a smile on it. I said nothing. I dropped him at his building, watched him walk in without a backward glance, and sat in the parking lot for 11 minutes before I could make myself pull back into traffic. The third time, it wasn't even about money, and somehow that made it worse. It was a Sunday afternoon, and Derek was in the car with him this time. Both of them heading to a bachelor party planning lunch, both of them a little loose from an early beer at brunch. Derek asked him, half joking, if he was nervous about marrying into that family, and Preston laughed. An easy, careless laugh, the kind you only let out when you're sure nobody who matters can hear you, and said, her dad's like this sweet old nobody, drives some kind of side gig, totally checked out guy. He'll sign whatever I put in front of him for the wedding budget without asking a single question. Derek laughed along with him. I kept my hands at 10 and 2 and my eyes on the road, and I thought about 38 years of double shifts and overtime so Emma could go to nursing school without loans, about the fact that sweet old nobody was raising 11 grand of his own retirement to help pay for the very wedding this man was joking about. And something in me went very still and very cold. The particular stillness of a man who has finally, fully, stopped giving someone the benefit of the doubt. 3 marks now. Careless, predatory, contemptuous. Each one worse than the last, and each one delivered in the privacy of the back seat of a stranger's car, to a stranger who happened to be the last man on earth he should have been careless in front of. I didn't tell Emma. Not yet. I want to be honest about that too, because I've turned it over in my mind 100 times since, wondering if I waited too long, wondering if silence made me complicit in some small way. But I also knew my daughter, and I knew that walking in with second-hand cab driver gossip and no proof would get me exactly one result: her defending him, and me looking like a jealous old man who couldn't stand sharing his daughter's love with someone else. So I waited. I kept driving. I kept my mouth shut and my eyes open, and somewhere in me, quietly, a decision was forming that I hadn't fully admitted to myself yet. The morning that changed everything came 9 days before the wedding, a Tuesday again. I noticed that later, that it bookended itself that way, though I didn't think about it at the time. I'd picked Preston up from a bar near his office at almost midnight, later than my usual runs, but Carol had gone to bed and I couldn't sleep anyway, so I'd taken a few late fares to clear my head. He got in already on the phone with Derek, voice low and thick with 3 or 4 drinks, and for the first 2 minutes it was ordinary, work complaints, wedding logistics, the usual. Then Derek must have asked him something, because Preston's voice dropped even lower, almost a murmur, the kind of voice a man uses when he thinks the walls themselves might be listening. Look, I'm not backing out, he said. I need this. Her family's got that little rental property upstate, and once we're married and the estate stuff with her grandmother settles, that's mine too. Community property, whatever, my lawyer already looked at it. I just need to get through the next 6 months without her figuring out about Ashley. A pause. Then, quieter still. No, I'm not stopping that either. Ashley knows the score. Emma doesn't need to. Once the ring's on and the money's sorted, I'll figure out the rest. Her dad's not going to cause problems. Guy's a pushover. And her mom's too nice to make waves. I got this whole thing mapped out, man. I didn't move. I didn't gasp or swerve or do anything a person does in a movie. I just drove, hands steady, eyes on the road, while every word landed somewhere deep and permanent. And I understood in that moment that this wasn't carelessness anymore, wasn't even garden variety selfishness. This was a plan. A woman he intended to marry for property he hadn't earned, a girlfriend he intended to keep on the side, and a family he'd already decided he could walk over because he'd sized up her pushover father and decided the man wouldn't cause problems. I dropped him at his building. He said thanks man to the windshield and walked inside without a backward glance, same as always, and I sat there in the dark for a long time with my phone in my hand, because halfway through that call, my hands had already done something my mind was still catching up to. I'd hit record on the dashcam's audio feed, the one I kept running for insurance purposes, the one that had just quietly saved every word. I called Carol from the car at midnight, and she picked up on the second ring, worry already in her voice because I never called that late. I told her everything. The coincidence of the rides, the months of silence, the 3 marks I'd carried without telling her, and now this. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said the thing I needed to hear. You have to tell her, Walter. Tonight if you have to. But you tell her with proof, not with a story she can talk herself out of believing. So that's what I did. I drove home, and Carol and I sat at the kitchen table until nearly 3 in the morning, listening to that recording 3 times over, writing down every word. And by the time the sun came up, we had a plan of our own. Smaller than his, quieter, but a plan. I didn't confront Preston. I didn't call him, didn't corner him, didn't give him a chance to spin a story before Emma ever heard the truth. Instead, 4 days before the wedding, I asked Emma to come by the house alone, told her it was important, and when she sat down across from me at that same kitchen table, I told her everything. About the rides, about the months of silence, about why I'd kept quiet, and then I played her the recording. I watched my daughter's face do something I hope I never have to watch again. Watched 28 years of trust collapse in real time across 4 minutes and 11 seconds of audio. Watched her hands shake as she asked me to play it again, and then a third time, as if repetition might change what the words said. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. Not right away. She sat very still, the way I imagine I must have looked driving that car home from the bar. And then she asked me one question. Did you know it was him? That whole first time at the coffee shop? I told her the truth. No, not that first time, but soon after, and I told her exactly why I hadn't said anything the moment I suspected, and she nodded slowly, and I think some part of her understood, even through the wreckage, that I'd been trying to protect her from exactly this kind of pain until I had something undeniable to protect her with. The rehearsal dinner happened anyway, 3 nights later, because Emma insisted on it, not to save the wedding, but because she wanted Preston to say every word he'd said in that car, out loud, in front of the people who loved her. I watched her walk into that private room at the restaurant with a composure I don't know if I could have managed at her age, greet Preston's parents warmly, take her seat beside a man who had no idea his entire arrangement had already collapsed. Derek was there too, oblivious, laughing at something on his phone. When the toasts came around, Emma stood, thanked everyone for coming, and then, in a voice that didn't waver even once, said she had something to share before anyone said another word about the wedding. She played the recording through her phone's speaker, the whole 4 minutes and 11 seconds, into a room that had been full of clinking glasses and easy laughter 30 seconds before and was now utterly, completely silent. I watched Preston's face drain of color in real time. I watched Derek's jaw drop, watched him realize he'd been sitting next to the driver he'd laughed with about her sweet old nobody dad, without ever once looking at the man's face closely enough to recognize him 3 weeks later at his own rehearsal dinner. Preston's mother made a small, horrified sound. His father stood up and walked out of the room without a word. And Preston himself just sat there, mouth working with no sound coming out, while my daughter looked at him with a calm I will be proud of for the rest of my life, and said, "The wedding's off. Don't call me, don't call my parents, and don't ever come near that account you emptied without telling me. I've already spoken to a lawyer. The weeks after were hard, the way any ending is hard, even an ending that's the right one." Emma moved back in with us for a while, not because she couldn't manage on her own, but because she wanted to, and Carol and I were glad for the company and gladdened still that she'd come to us in time and not after. Preston's firm let him go within the month. It turned out his creative accounting with joint funds wasn't limited to Emma's account, and once one thread got pulled, the rest unraveled on its own. No help needed from us. Derek stopped calling him, too, embarrassed, I heard secondhand, that he'd laughed along with all of it. I never had to say a vindictive word to anyone. The truth did all the work once it was finally let into the room. It's been 8 months now. Emma's dating again, slowly, carefully, and last week she asked if I'd teach her how to check a car's oil and tire pressure herself. Just so I know, she said, and I understood what she meant without her having to explain it. I still drive sometimes, though less than I used to. Carol says I don't need the excuse to leave the house anymore, and maybe she's right. But every so often, when a fare gets in and doesn't bother to look at my face, doesn't bother to say thank you, talks on the phone like the man behind the wheel is furniture instead of a person, I think about that Tuesday morning at the coffee shop, the one that started it all, the one nobody would have remembered, if it hadn't turned out to be the one none of us could forget. If this story hit you, if you've ever been underestimated by someone who never bothered to really look at you, give it a like. Drop a comment telling me who you thought of while you were listening, and subscribe for more stories like this one every week.